Hi, I'm Caroline, and I've created a lot of things, but mostly I've created a life I love. Join me on my journey as a podcaster, business owner, and mom as I try to create all the things. Welcome to the Caroline Creates podcast. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Caroline Creates podcast. Today, I wanted to chat about some of the fears around podcasting. So I recently did a survey to my newsletter list and put it out to anyone who wanted to do it on Instagram. And it was so eye-opening to me. There were some things on it that I definitely knew that people, probably had hiccups with or felt was hard for them. But it was really eye-opening for me to see how crippling some of our fears and insecurities can be when we're deciding to launch a new media. I love podcasting, obviously, and I think it's a really great tool that you can use for your business. But there are some kind of things that you definitely need to think about before you start a podcast. And a lot of these fears kind of play into that. One of the biggest fears that I saw and kind of a hang up was the time issue. And I've talked about this before. Podcasting does take a lot of time. You have to record episodes, you're coming up with content every week, all the things that go with that. If you're putting it on your website as a blog post, which you should, any extra stuff that goes with that, it can definitely take time. The first thing I want to say about this is, you really need to evaluate your life and your schedule and see if you have time for this because, you may not have time for this at all. And that's okay. Maybe podcasting isn't for you. But if you feel like you still want to give it a go, I really want to encourage you to think about how and what systems you're going to use to make this work for you. Having a system in place is really, really important. And I actually have a Trello board that I like to use, and I will link that in the show notes. The other thing that's really going to help you with time is batching. So like today, I'm going to try and record 2 to 3 episodes. That way I'm ahead and I'm not having to worry about recording anything last minute. This is so important. When you're recording content last minute, it is not your best content, the end period. But if you can batch and be on top of your schedule, going back to that whole systems situation, then you're going to be in a lot better place and you're not going to feel stressed and frazzled. So I think kind of setting these things up in your mind before you even get started is really going to help you kind of overcome that fear of running out of time. Another fear that seemed to come up a lot in the survey was people were concerned that podcasting seemed really saturated, that a lot of business owners had podcasts and their podcast was not going to be unique. They didn't have anything unique to say. I feel like this really gets me because if there's anything I've learned about podcasting, it's that everybody has a unique voice and perspective, and everybody has something special and unique to say. Everybody has their own special, unique voice. And even if you are doing something that somebody else is doing in the business world and you both have podcasts, how you tell something is different than how they are going to tell something. It's not going to be the same, and it might be the same audience and it might not be. There are podcasts that I don't listen to, and there are podcasts that I do listen to because I really enjoy the host. I really enjoy listening to the person that I'm listening to. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. Your podcast is not going to be the same as the person over here who's running maybe a similar business to you because you're not that same person, right? Inject some of your story, inject some of your passion into your podcast, and that's really going to shine through and make you stand out in your own special, unique way. And I just really want to encourage people who feel this way. I want you to sit down and think about, okay, what about me is unique? What about my perspective is unique? And how can I share that through my podcast? One of the things that's unique about me is that I am a mom. I'm a homeschool mom and I work from home. And so I do try to infuse that into this podcast, and I infuse it into my other podcasts. It's my life. It's who I am. It makes my perspective unique. The other thing is I have a podcast about podcasting, but I am very specific. I am trying to help at-home podcasters. So let's say you want to have a podcast about yoga, and there are like 500 other yoga podcasts out there. Well, what makes you unique? Maybe you do yoga for people who have arthritis. So talk about that. Talk about, your struggles. Talk about, how your hip hurts every morning when you get out of bed, but when you do a sun salutation, it changes your life. These kinds of things. There are ways to come across as unique. And the other thing I want to say is, even though podcasting feels saturated, it is still growing. It is not as saturated as people think. It is a growing media. It is booming in its own way. And I want you to understand that now is a good time to hop on board. And so don't hesitate. Sit down, do the homework, think about what makes your perspective unique. And then I want you to jump in and just start recording episodes, because I can guarantee that when you do that, you'll start to hear your own perspective come through and your own voice, and you will start to feel more confident. So that's a huge fear. Another fear that I want to talk about is the fear that nobody will listen to your podcast. So let's just have a little numbers powwow right now. I want to do a whole episode on this eventually, but numbers are not as important as you think they are. There's this kind of saying that, we've been talking a lot about in some of my other business worlds, but I would rather have 5 engaged people than 500 disengaged people. I don't care how many downloads we have, as long as who is listening and downloading, we are impacting, right? So we may have only 500 downloads an episode or only 10 downloads an episode. But what I want to know is that those 10 people learned something and were impacted and gained a lot from it. Some podcasts take off the minute they launch, and some it takes a while to get going. And that is okay. It is okay to grow slow, in the words Laura Casey. I want you guys to understand that the numbers are not important. Now, if you're sitting on some numbers, 20 episodes in, 30 episodes in, and you still feel like you're not getting enough downloads, that's a different issue. But I don't want you to go into this thinking, I'm going to get 100,000 downloads and a sponsor, because that is not how it works. We're about to hit 150,000 downloads for our podcast, and we still don't have sponsors. And we've been offered sponsorships, but we don't feel like they are the sponsorships that value our listeners. Our listeners are so important to us, and we love them to pieces, and everything we do for them. And we want them to, really gain something from it. And that is more important than chasing after downloads. And also just this whole idea that nobody will listen to it. If you have an audience on Instagram, if you have an email list, that's a handful of people right there who will probably click and listen. So don't think that nobody will listen, because I can guarantee you that somebody will. And again, slow growth is totally okay. Let's see, what are some other fears that I've kind of come across recently? I think just, in general, there's just a fear of knowing how to do it. The technology really scares people. I want to assure you that it's not as scary as it seems. But if you do feel like you need help, there are resources out there to help you. I mean, you can Google, you can find anything. And of course, I'm here and I have services to help you kind of overcome that hurdle. And I also will be launching my podcast mini launch guide, which is for people who want to DIY their podcast launch. But I also you just don't need a lot. So you just need a simple microphone, a computer, QuickTime, or something similar, and you can record an episode. It really isn't as hard as it sounds, and I think sometimes we make it a lot harder because we think that we need to sound like the big podcasts who record in studio booths, recording studios, and that's just not the case. You can be an at-home podcaster and really succeed. So I really want to encourage you to not be terrified of the technology and the things that you think you need to get started, because you don't need them at all. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I just really wanted to just kind of hash out some of those fears. I want you to, if you are experiencing any of these fears, I want you to just work through them like I suggested in this podcast episode, but I also want you to just start recording episodes and see how it feels and see if it feels like something that you think that you can do. And I can guarantee you, once you get started, you will be so much more confident and you won't have all these fears that you do now. And of course, if you have any questions or want to talk about these some more, you can direct message me on Instagram or you can email me hello@carolinecreates.com. I hope you guys have a wonderful week and I'll see you next week. Before you go, please head to Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. I would love to hear from you. And to learn more about me and follow along my journey, head to www.carolinecreates.com. There you can also listen to episodes, watch YouTube videos, and find out more about my podcasting services. Thanks so much. Have a great day.